At Rikers Island, everyone knows the rules, but almost none of them are written down. A correction officer once told a federal monitor, "Policy is what's written on paper. Culture is what happens in the corridors." In 2019, a detainee named Robert Hinton refused an order to move cells. 6 officers dragged him into a hallway, cuffed him, and beat him unconscious. Their official report claimed necessary force. Surveillance footage showed a ritual. A performance of dominance, carried out not in anger, but in accordance with the unspoken laws of Rikers Island. Pause. Those corridors are more than passageways between cells. They're courts, arenas, marketplaces, and graves. And if you want to understand why reform has failed, you have to understand what governs them. Not the Department of Correction. Not the City of New York. But the Code. This is not a story about one jail. It's a study of an ecosystem, an organism built on rules no outsider ever sees. Rikers Island operates on an unofficial legal system, an evolving code of conduct that determines who survives, who commands respect, and who disappears into silence. In this film, we'll treat Rikers as an anthropological site, a sovereign culture that has developed its own hierarchies, justice rituals, and informal governance. A culture born from abandonment. Our argument is simple: Rikers Island is not lawless. It operates under a form of law too primitive and too efficient for official recognition. This is the code of the corridors. To understand the code, we start with the terrain. Rikers Island is an isolated archipelago of authority, 413 acres of landfill, sealed off from the city by a single bridge. Inside, power flows through physical space, corridors, dayrooms, dorms, and the bubble, the plexiglass control booth that functions as both nerve center and throne. Every jail has corridors, but at Rikers, corridors are political zones. They're where detainees are moved, disciplined, or disappeared. It's where correction officers assert dominance, out of sight of cameras, out of earshot of supervisors. The corridors shape behavior because they dictate visibility. In the words of an anonymous CO interviewed in a 2022 Marshall Project report, "You learn quick. If it didn't happen on camera, it didn't happen at all." This geography of partial visibility creates opportunity, and from opportunity, a culture of improvisational governance. The Rikers Code did not appear overnight. Its lineage stretches back to the 1970s and 80s, when the city's jails became overcrowded and underfunded. During that era, gangs from the streets, primarily the Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, and Nidus, brought their external hierarchies into confinement. Inmates developed internal laws of protection, negotiation, and retribution. At the same time, correction officers formed their own counterculture. With minimal oversight and strong union protection, they evolved a separate code: loyalty to colleagues above law, silence above transparency. The 1986 Correction Officers Benevolent Association strike, when guards staged an illegal walkout over pay and discipline, cemented that ethos. When the city sued, the union's message was clear: we run this island. In this dual hierarchy, the official chain of command became theater. The real governance happened horizontally, between officers and inmates negotiating control of the corridors. From an anthropological perspective, Rikers functions as what sociologist Irving Goffman termed a total institution. Like asylums, monasteries, or military barracks, it seals individuals into a self-contained world where outside norms collapse. Inside that world, new norms arise. Anthropologists might call it carceral customary law, an adaptive system of survival codes transmitted orally, enforced socially, and modified through violence. Every population under duress creates its own moral order. Rikers is no exception, only more compressed, more volatile, and more visible. Language at Rikers reinforces hierarchy. Officers are the bulls. Detainees are the bodies. Informants are rats. Loyal inmates are stand-up dudes. Solitary confinement is the Bing. Even the word inmate is often replaced by man. Not as respect but as classification. As one detainee told The New Yorker in 2014, "You stop being your name. You're a man in 5 South. That's who you are." This linguistic reduction is central to the code. It strips identity and assigns function. It is both dehumanizing and adaptive, a way to navigate an environment where everyone's role is precarious. Every code defines morality. At Rikers, morality is inverted. Snitching is the highest crime. Violence, if executed with purpose, is a form of virtue. Cooperation with staff is betrayal. Silence is sacred. Among officers, speaking out about misconduct is career suicide. Anthropologist Didier Fassin in his Ethnography Prison Worlds wrote, "Where the state's legitimacy erodes, the moral vacuum fills with loyalty. At Rikers, loyalty is the only law that matters." The Rikers ecosystem operates on two overlapping but distinct codes. The officer code, we take care of our own. The inmate code, don't talk, don't fold, don't fall. Both function as mutual surveillance systems, ensuring compliance through social pressure rather than external authority. Officers maintain the blue wall, a culture of silence reinforced by union power. Inmates enforce the jailhouse code, where reputation is currency and disrespect must be repaid in kind. What emerges is a form of dual sovereignty. Two governments coexisting, neither legitimate, both absolute. Every closed system develops rites of passage. At Rikers, initiation occurs the moment you enter a dorm. New arrivals, known as fresh fish, are immediately assessed. Their posture, speech, and affiliations are decoded. If they appear weak, they're tested, sometimes with intimidation, sometimes with violence. In 2013, a 16-year-old named Justin Smith described to the New York Times what happened his first night. "They made me fight another kid my size. Said it was to see if I was soft. The officers watched from the bubble. The test is not personal. It's structural. It maintains hierarchy, reaffirms control, and defines belonging. Even among officers, rituals exist. New COs learn quickly that writing accurate reports or intervening too early marks you as unreliable. The unspoken initiation is participation, or complicity. Incarcerated societies develop economies where currency substitutes for freedom. At Rikers, the most valuable commodities are information, access, and protection. A detainee might pay an officer in commissary goods to transfer to a safer dorm. An officer might sell phone time or medical access to trusted inmates. Everything is negotiable, nothing is official. This shadow economy stabilizes the island's instability. As one former warden, Emmanuel Bailey, told a city council hearing, "Without the trades, the place would implode. But that stabilization comes at a cost. The more efficient the informal economy becomes, the less incentive there is to reform the official one." Certain dorms at Rikers are informally designated as program houses. These are areas nominally dedicated to education or drug treatment. In reality, they're controlled by inmate cliques sanctioned by officers to keep peace. The arrangement is transactional. Detainees maintain order, officers look the other way. Anthropologically, this is delegated governance, the state outsourcing control to the controlled. One detainee, interviewed in a 2020 Board of Correction report, said, "They let the shot callers run the dorm. As long as nobody got stabbed, they didn't care." This peace through complicity mirrors colonial strategies of rule, governance by intermediaries, not laws. Violence at Rikers is neither random nor senseless. It follows a logic, a contract embedded in the code. There are rules about when and how to fight. You can't jump someone without a reason. If you lose, you accept it. Retaliation requires authorization. If an officer intervenes unfairly, that officer becomes part of the next equation. The corridors are the theater of this contract. The violence affirms hierarchy, restores order, and communicates status, much like ritualized combat in traditional societies. But unlike ritual, these acts are unrecorded. The island's silence is its archive. The bubble, the glass booth where officers monitor dorms, is the island's control room. It's where the unwritten code of officers crystallizes. Inside, cameras flicker across multiple monitors, but everyone knows which corners the cameras miss. Officers exchange quiet pacts. You cover me, I cover you. In 2015, during the Nunez versus City of New York federal case, investigators found evidence of falsified reports describing non-existent inmate aggression to justify injuries. The pattern wasn't individual misconduct, it was a shared grammar. The bubble represents the bureaucratic manifestation of the officer's code, detached, protected, and insulated by glass. Every anthropological system answers a need. The Rikers Code functions to preserve stability where official governance has collapsed. It allows the jail to continue operating despite chronic absenteeism, understaffing, and infrastructural decay. It replaces formal justice with social order. In essence, the code is not rebellion, it's adaptation. It's how humans manufacture structure when institutions withdraw. The cost of this self-regulating system is human life. In 2022 alone, 19 people died in Rikers custody, the highest number in a quarter century. Most were awaiting trial, legally innocent. Some overdosed. Others were murdered. Others simply disappeared into paperwork. Each death is a breach of the formal system, but a fulfillment of the informal one. As one correctional staffer told the Department of Investigation in 2021, nobody means for them to die. It's just what happens when you play by the rules. The code is efficient precisely because it is amoral. Every mayor since Ed Koch has promised to reform Rikers. Every commissioner has promised culture change. But you cannot reform a culture you refuse to study. Programs collapse because they attempt to overlay bureaucratic law on top of carceral custom, ignoring the anthropology beneath. When the city banned punitive segregation for adolescents in 2014, violence spiked. The reform removed the old deterrent but failed to replace the social mechanisms that the inmates already obeyed. The result was chaos. Sociologist Victor Rios once observed that systems don't break down, they adapt. At Rikers, the system adapted to survive the reforms. From an anthropological lens, Rikers is a case study in what happens when formal authority becomes symbolic. The island is effectively a microstate governed by custom, not law, by ritual, not regulation. Power there is not legitimized but performed. Respect is not earned but enforced. Justice is not administered but exchanged. This culture doesn't vanish when detainees leave. It migrates back into neighborhoods, shaping attitudes toward law, trust, and violence. The corridors of Rikers echo far beyond the island. The most devastating consequence of the code is epistemological. When everyone lies, officers in reports, inmates in testimony, administrators in press releases, truth itself loses meaning. A federal monitor in 2023 wrote, "It is difficult to ascertain what is real at Rikers. The record-keeping culture is fictional. When fiction becomes the norm, governance becomes theater. Rikers is no longer a correctional institution. It is a stage play of control, performed endlessly to preserve the illusion of order." The city's Close Rikers Plan, approved in 2019 and slated for 2027, aims to replace the island with smaller, borough-based jails. But even if the buildings vanish, the culture will not. The code will migrate, through officers reassigned, through detainees released, through the social networks that connect both. As long as the structural conditions persist, poverty, over-policing, institutional neglect, the corridors will simply relocate. You can close the island. You cannot close the code. In anthropology, there's a concept called liminality, the space between one identity and another. Rikers Island is pure liminality, a place between freedom and punishment, order and chaos, law and lawlessness. Those who enter it become something else, officers and detainees alike. They adapt to the code because the alternative is extinction. In the end, the unwritten law of Rikers may be the truest reflection of modern America's justice. A mirror showing not what we legislate but what we tolerate. What does it mean when a nation's largest jail functions by rules its own government cannot define? When loyalty outweighs legality, and silence becomes the only common language? Perhaps Rikers Island is not an anomaly, but a preview. A glimpse into what happens when governance retreats and culture fills the void. Because in the corridors of Rikers, the state no longer rules. The code does. Thank you for watching. The search for truth continues.